Somewhere, about 100,000 years ago, a person died. And instead of leaving the body where it fell, instead of walking away the way every other creature on Earth would have, someone stayed. They dug into the ground with their hands. They placed the body inside. They covered it over. And then they stood there, above the earth, with something in their chest that had no name yet. That moment, unremarkable to the universe, invisible in the fossil record, except for the faintest trace, may be the most human thing that has ever happened. We are the only animal that buries its dead, and we have never stopped.
Think about what an animal does when something in its group dies. A wolf pack moves on. A crow may linger near a fallen companion for a few hours, calling out. An elephant will sometimes stand near a dead relative for days, touching the bones with its trunk. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for weeks, refusing to release the body long after decomposition has begun.
These are real. These are documented, and they are heartbreaking to watch. But none of these animals dig a hole. None of them place the body carefully inside. None of them return to that spot years later. None of them leave objects beside the dead. Tools, flowers, pigment, food. Only we do that. The question is why? And the answer reaches back further than civilization, further than language, further than anything we usually think of as culture. It reaches into the structure of the human brain itself, into a mind so committed to the people it loves that it could not, even in death, simply let them go.
The oldest confirmed burial site in the world sits in a cave in Israel called Kafsa. Inside, archaeologists found the remains of at least 15 individuals, deliberately placed in shallow graves, some with red ochre sprinkled across the bones, some positioned with their arms folded. The burials are approximately 92,000 years old. These were anatomically modern humans, people like us.
But the story gets older and stranger than that. In a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger announced in 2023 that they had found something that should not exist: deliberate burials, bodies placed in shallow graves, possibly marked with carved symbols, belonging not to Homo sapiens, but to Homo naledi. Homo naledi had a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours. If this finding holds, and the debate in the scientific community is fierce, it means burial behavior predates modern human cognition by hundreds of thousands of years. It means the impulse to enter the dead is not the product of big brains and complex symbolic thinking. It is something older, something more instinctual, something that does not require intelligence so much as it requires attachment. To understand why we bury, you have to understand what grief actually is inside the brain. Grief is not an emotion in the simple sense. It is not like fear or anger, which fire fast and resolve. Grief is a prolonged neurological crisis triggered by the permanent absence of someone the brain had built its circuitry around. When you form a close bond with another person, your brain does not merely register their presence as pleasant. It restructures itself around them. It builds predictive models, patterns of expectation. Your nervous system learns where they are, when they will appear, how they sound, how they move through space near you. When that person dies, the brain does not immediately update. It keeps generating the expectations. It keeps reaching for the pattern that is no longer there. This is why grief feels, in the early stages, less like sadness and more like confusion. Like something is missing, but you cannot locate what. Like reaching for a light switch in a room you've rearranged. The brain, in other words, resists the fact of permanent absence. It was never designed to accept it cleanly. And burial, some researchers now believe, may have emerged directly from that resistance. Placing the body in the ground is a physical act of processing. It is the brain's way of making permanence tangible. You cannot see the absence, so you create a location for it. You give the loss an address.
The grave becomes the place where the missing person now lives, fixed, findable, visitable. The mind that cannot accept gone creates a somewhere instead. But here is where it gets more complicated. Because not everyone agrees that the earliest burials were about love. Some researchers argue that the first deliberate interments were primarily practical, about hygiene, about keeping decomposing bodies away from living spaces, about predators drawn by the smell of death. Others suggest early burial was driven not by grief, but by fear. Fear of the dead returning, fear of the spirit lingering, fear of contamination, spiritual or physical. The archaeological record does not settle this cleanly. Some early burial sites contain evidence of deep care, bodies positioned in fetal poses, surrounded by grave goods, covered in pigment that had to be deliberately gathered and applied. Others show signs of rapid, functional disposal, with no apparent ceremony at all. What this tells us is that burial was never one thing. It was many things, solving many problems at once. It was grief, fear, and social ritual, and sanitation, and memory, and meaning, all braided together inside a species that had just become complicated enough to need all of those things simultaneously. The grave was not invented for one reason. It was invented because we became the kind of animal that needed reasons. Here is what is strange about grief in the modern world. We still run the same software. The funerals we hold, the headstones we carve, the flowers we leave, the dates we mark on calendars every year after someone is gone. These are not modern inventions. They are the same neurological and social technology our ancestors developed when the brain first encountered permanent loss and refused to simply file it away. We have added language to it. We have added religion, ceremony, legal infrastructure. We have built entire industries around the management of death. But underneath all of that, the core function has not changed. We are still giving the absence an address. We are still returning to a place because the brain needs somewhere to put the weight of what it cannot carry and cannot put down. Grief counselors today describe something called continuing bonds theory, the idea that healthy grieving does not mean severing the connection to the person who died, but rather transforming it, finding a new way to hold the relationship now that the person is gone, talking to them, visiting their grave, keeping objects they touched. This is not pathology. This is ancient. This is what the brain has always done with loss, because it was never built to do anything else. There is a philosopher named Thomas Nagel who once wrote that the most important fact about human consciousness is that there is something it is like to be us. Something it is like. Meaning experience is not just processing, it is felt. It has texture and weight and darkness. No other animal, as far as we know, buries its dead because it cannot bear the alternative. No other animal creates a location for loss because the mind needs somewhere to stand while it learns to carry what cannot be put down. The first grave was not a ritual. It was not a religion. It was not a cultural achievement. It was a person standing over the earth, pressing something unbearable into a shape they could return to. And 100,000 years later, you have done the same thing, or you will. That is what it is to be human, not the intelligence, not the language, not the tools or the cities or the art. The grave, the insistence, in the face of everything, that the people we love still have a place in the world, even after the world has taken them from it.